welcome back to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Ralph, are you there?
I sure am, Dr. Rima. All right, now we have to bring Dane on with us.
Dane Wiggington is a very important person on this planet. As he will tell you, he didn't want the job that he's doing. It was thrust upon him by being a perpetual and an inevitable truth teller. When you see something that has to be told, and it is so important that not fixing it means that your own children have no future, you have two choices. You can put your head in the sand and hope to God that somebody else fixes it, or you can do what's right and you can fix it. I want to tell you about the Natural Solutions Foundation and why it does so many different things. Why are we interested in food? Why are we interested in vaccines and drugs? Why are we interested in safe, natural health options? Why are we interested in so many different things? Because they all have a common core. Why are we interested in GMO foods? Because all of these things tamper with your genetic matrix, and all of these things are genocidal tools. And so what we're interested in is preserving your health. Preserving.
Hello, Dane. Yes.
And we're also interested in talking to Dane Wiggington. But before we bring Dane on, let me tell you that I would like it very much if you would go to www.drrima, excuse me, DRRIMA truthreports.com.
First of all, hello, Dane. Let me give people a little bit of information, and we'll have a very interesting discussion, I am sure. Dr. Rima wants you all to remember to go to www.donate.drrimatruth.com. That's donate.drrimatruth.com, and you can find there access to the information about the FDA warning letter and the other activities of the past number of days, an opportunity where you can also donate. We need that help for our legal defense fund. And also you'll see the nano silver product right there. No claims, just the product. All right, Dane, Dr. Rima, let's go on and explore the issue of geoengineering. Dane Wiggington, our guest, is the webmaster of GeoEngineeringWatch.org, I believe, and has been a guest on this program a number of times. Well, can we blame you for the weather?
Well, that I received Dane's latest video from at least 15 different people who sent it to me. They don't know each other. They just said, this is important. You have to see that. And when things are spreading that way, it means that the activist behind them is doing a wonderful job. And that would be you, Dane.
Well, I appreciate that, Rima and Ralph. And, without people like you, we wouldn't have a voice. So it's all of us working together that matters. And in this particular subject, it's imperative that we all prioritize this issue, because it's quite literally tearing the planet's life support systems apart, from the clouds to the ground. And again, as we've stated before, short of nuclear cataclysm, this is the greatest and most immediate threat we face. And even in regard to the nuclear issue, there are connections with climate engineering, because some of the same mechanisms that are being used to manipulate the climate appear to be involved with some of the seismic activity, which we know has been a factor with the meltdown of Fukushima. And so everything is connected, but the overall ramifications of the global climate engineering programs are absolutely cataclysmic, and it's affecting everything that lives and breathes on this planet.
Wow. Here we are, folks, talking about the first hour. We were talking about world pandemic. We touched upon the malignant oscillations in all of the systems, like the weather that General Bert has identified. We're now talking about geoengineering. We haven't even mentioned Fukushima yet, although we received, by the way, a very interesting email yesterday from Murata-san, filling us in on some of the latest developments, which we will be relaying to everyone in a few days. But here we are, and our guest is telling us that yet another chance for civilization to be wiped out. This is, this is serious stuff on a certain level. It's also all symptomatic of an overriding problem. And the overriding problem is, how do you stop a black op once it's been funded and started? How do you stop the crony corporatist system from literally destroying our civilization, our families, everything that we've built over the past 500 years, quite literally? How do we do it? And I hear General Bert's voice in the background, I think. I'm not sure.
Bert,
You did.
my best to the general. That's the question of the hour, Ralph, that everybody asks, how can we stop this? But I'm hearing from more families who have family members in the military that are waking up to this issue, realizing what their family members are involved with. And once that happens, the pressure is brought to bear on those family members who have been told, we absolutely believe that what they're doing is some planetary saving endeavor, that these saturating the atmosphere with these toxic, extremely toxic light scattering particulates is some endeavor to save humanity. It couldn't be further from the truth. But once these people and their families wake up to the fact that what they're involved with, if it continues, will eliminate any chance we have, we see a lot of division, and now family members that are trying to find ways out of what they're involved in. And that could be a lot of things, refusing to simply carry out orders. If we could simply bring this to critical mass, I think we would have a shockwave around the globe. I think General Bert would probably elaborate on that. If we had a whole population, if we had the majority of global population aware that they're being sprayed like rats, that the atmosphere, which is as thin as a layer of paint on a basketball, by the way, that's what keeps us alive on this planet, this very thin, very, very complex, miraculous atmosphere that's being completely decimated. Once people realize that, and by the way, we have another statistic, guys, to add to this from a world-leading researcher from MIT. On the current trajectory, within 10 years, 1 out of 2 children will have autism. 1 out of 2 children. So quite simply, when we know that mathematically the greatest cause of contamination known to be connected with autism, aluminum, and other heavy metals as well, all these various factors make it crystal clear that we are under an all-out assault if we don't deal with it. The end of the road is very near term.
Dan, the answer to your question is you're quite right. First of all, the number of people that you're talking about that we need is called mass. It's a principle of war. And when you have the mass all speaking out, waking up, and then speaking out, like I did, oh, by the way, because while I was on active duty, I really believed in what I was doing. And then, as I learned piece by piece by piece by piece that there was something else going on, you then begin to make sure that you're looking at all of the options, not just the ones that you thought you believed in. So converting yourself from standby to joining the offense, another principle of war. You got to go on the offense. You can't sit on your hands. And you take the action in mass, principle of war again. Then you have an opportunity to go and do something that is absolutely worthwhile, which is to reverse the direction that we're headed in right now.
General Bert, you are the epitome of honor in the military, and I feel honored to know you and to be able to communicate with you. And what you have just stated is the premise on which I've tried to focus all our efforts at GeoEngineering Watch, that the military has a great many honorable men and women who have simply been lied to. And once they...
Yep. The answer to that is yes, just like me. I was asleep incidentally, I knew a lot about what was going on, but I was not paying attention to my government doing things that ultimately would lead us in the wrong direction.
We had a very interesting conversation yesterday with somebody who made the point that what is killing us all is moral schizophrenia. That is to say that we know something is bad for us or bad for the planet or killing us, and yet we drop a line down the middle of our minds and we cut out that piece of knowledge because it's inconvenient or because it's too much trouble or because it can't really be true, because then I'd have to really confront these issues. And I think moral schizophrenia is a very good phrase for it. It's a self-diagnosable disease. You can diagnose it in others, but it means nothing until you diagnose it in yourself, and then it's curable. The way it's curable is by taking high doses, regular doses of truth, and not letting it be diluted by convenience.
I agree, and that normalcy bias, this is, certainly a huge part of the equation here in the States, that so many people have been so shielded from any sort of reality for so long that they can't even seem to comprehend realities, even when presented with the facts, because for them, again, you still have the fast food stores open, American Idol is still on every night, football games, tailgate parties, and the type of reality that we are trying to awaken them to is so diametrically opposed to what they've been trained to believe that awakening is very difficult for many people. But now in the States, conditions are so harsh. In California, for example, they're tearing out orchards with excavators. There's no water. And the amount of sickness here, you guys have all seen the respiratory sickness spreading throughout parts of the state.
Right.
Now we're getting so many people from so many different arenas. I just spoke to a coach, a football coach for all the high school football teams in Northern California. They know something's wrong. And now there's fertile ground there now. When you plant the right seeds, credible seeds, seeds that can be, with information that can be verified and backed up, now those seeds are sprouting. So we're trying to reach all the non-choir, if you will, and they are beginning to wake up.
Indeed. I guess for the disease of sheepleitis, what people really need is vitamin T for truth. And and that wakes the sheeple up and turns them into battering rams.
You don't mean that a vitamin might cure something, Ralph, do you?
Oh, of course not. It only supports the immune system.
Sorry.
Very, very hard tried in many ways, and no matter how hard they have tried, and perhaps down your guys' direction, I don't know if you would have seen, there was a media blitz here about 2 weeks ago stating that the ozone hole was recovering. Now, that the data in the article did not indicate anything that would make one come to that conclusion. They simply said, if this and this and this happened, then perhaps by 2070 it might start to get better. Well, what kind of equation is that? That would be like saying if people didn't die, they would live longer. Well, yeah, that's true, but how does that apply to the ozone hole? They didn't give any data to indicate the hole is getting better, because it's not. They never mentioned the northern hemisphere ozone hole. They only talked about the southern hemisphere hole. So they put out data, and people, even though they know they're getting skin cancer, even though they feel how hot the sun is, even though they see the bark burn off the trees, they see a headline, and they abandon their sense of reason. They abandon their own thought processes, and they swallow the headline, hook and sinker, the whole thing.
The big lie works best, Dane. The big lie works best when fed by experts. And the government is very good at buying experts.
They are. In fact, here we have how many thousands of meteorologists in the continental U.S., none of which have shown the honor to stand up, and I take that back. There's a couple exceptions. I know a couple of them. Alan Buckman, former military meteorologist, but if we had some honor, like certainly what General Bert has been a shining example of, maybe some of these people would step forward. And I just got a message forwarded to me by someone in the Meteorological Society that I can't think of what the comment exactly said. They did not consider my work valid. Well, why would they? I mean, do we expect these people to admit to this elephant in the room? How would that affect them? Their job is to deny it. So we have an entire academic society, if you will, that is accepted by the population as the oracle of truth, when in fact this whole structure of scientific community, especially in regard to climate scientists, has been trained and conditioned to put out only the information that the power structure wants them to. And quite simply, if this continues, the ship will go to the bottom of the sea, with all of us on it. And that's the boat we're on right now. But I do believe, as I've spoken to some of these people, NOAA scientists, for example, who have told me to my face, they know these programs are going on. They're alarmed as hell. That was a direct quote. But they have no First Amendment protection. So we see how the government has set this up in a manner where these people are simply afraid to speak out. But I think we're nearing the point where they realize their job is not going to matter, their retirement's not going to matter, and this is perhaps, we're coming to the point where it will be their last chance to speak out and make a difference and have any chance of turning the ship before it sinks. So I think we're nearing that point.
So what do you think the people who created the program, the geoengineering activity, and have funded it as a black op, what do you think they were trying to accomplish, and what do you think is actually being, if I can use the word, accomplished? How do these two things match up? And if they don't match, why aren't the powers that be doing something about their creature?
Well, again, I believe that the scientific community, specific members that are at the heads of these programs, are in such an alternate reality that they are not disseminating correct data to the military structure as a whole. So what we have, I posted some weeks back, Dialogue with an Insider, parts 1 and 2. This is an architect within these programs. I had one conversation with him, but he had two more conversations with a U.S. congressional candidate that was the contact by which I reached this person. If people read this dialogue, it's posted on geoengineeringwatch.org under the right side column. Again, Dialogue with an Insider. It's very clear this person, as we described earlier, is rationalizing his part in this play and believes, at least at the surface, that what they are doing is some planetary saving endeavor. But this person knew nothing about various cataclysmic aspects of these programs, the ozone destruction, the toxification of soils, waters, and the breathable air column. And this person also, one of the things they're trying to accomplish, Ralph, and the graphing of the data shows this, the RH, the atmospheric RH, relative humidity, has dropped steadily since the late 40s. Now, this cannot happen unless there are desiccant particulates in the atmosphere. That's when the geoengineering programs are wrapped up in the late 40s. And part of their goal was to lower atmospheric humidity, and they have. And this is simply in direct opposition to the laws of physics. For every degree of warming Fahrenheit, the atmosphere carries 7% more moisture. It cannot drop in humidity unless there's a membrane of toxic desiccant particulates surrounding the planet, which there is. So as they do this, they affect the system, they affect the hydrological cycle, decimating the ozone layer. Again, all the negative effects for any rational person would clearly outweigh any perceived positive, but these people live in such bubbles that they convince themselves, perhaps to retain their own sanity, that what they're doing is for the common good, when the reality, based on all the data we already have, makes clear that that could not be further from the truth, that in fact climate engineering is pounding the nails into our collective coffins. If it continues, we will soon have nothing left to care about.
Indeed, what it seems to me is going on here is that the people who are doing this have an agenda that literally is, as Dr. Rima has told us, the great culling. They want to see a collapse of the human population, and they think that this is somehow a good thing. This is sort of, oh gosh, I remember reading some C.S. Lewis novels many years ago, in which the nature of evil is being explored, and the bureaucracy is basically acting in a pre-programmed, almost satanic way. And that seems to be what we're experiencing at the present time. We're experiencing people who see that their black ops are failing to do what they're supposed to do, if they're supposed to do. But let me understand this. They're supposed to reduce the amount of water in the atmosphere. Why? What's the purpose of that? What's the goal?
That's one aspect, because you have, again, water vapor is a greenhouse gas as well. But what the tunnel vision that occurs in these programs is, what else does water vapor do? What other effect does it have on the planet?
And what gives them the right to do these things without open public debate and decision?
Certainly they don't have that right. But
you know, and the fact that they're hiding it would seem to suggest an evil purpose.
It would. In fact, another direct statement from this insider, and again, this is all within the context of this article, he stated, and I quote about verbatim, that if the public found out about these programs, they would seek out those responsible and hang them or shoot them in front of a firing squad. Now, that indicates he knows clearly the public would never, ever accept these programs. So at some level, he knows what they're doing is, in an overall context, wrong. I have a question for General Bert. General, what percentage of your colleagues would you estimate that, if they had the correct data, would do the right thing? I mean, I can only believe the percentage is very high, but what percentage, if they really, really knew and understood the truth, let's say in regard to climate engineering, what percentage of the military structure that you worked in would try to do the right thing to the best of their ability?
That's a very interesting question. My classmates and company mates stopped talking to me because I was speaking out against the government.
Very interesting story. I'm so sorry.
About that. I'm curious. I mean,
there was a bulletin board, an online bulletin board, and General Bert was part of it. This was composed entirely of his classmates, class of '52, West Point. And during the reign of the twice unelected president, George W. Bush, he put up, not George Bush, but General Bert, put up a joke. It was actually a very funny joke about George Bush. His classmates went paroxysmal, and they considered him to be, they said that he was un-American, that he was unpatriotic, and that he was not fit for the society of the class of '52, and they banned him from the bulletin board, from the electronic communication system. So I don't know, what percentage of them understand freedom, understand duty, understand dissent? You tell me.
Well, the answer is the same that was with me. You know, I was asleep. I absolutely believed in everything that I was doing when I was in the military. I could not go to Vietnam because of my security clearances. I volunteered. I had to fight, literally fight, to get to Vietnam to do something that I believed in, simply because my security clearances were like they were, and they did not want me to get captured in Vietnam. And so I am essentially an outcast from my class at this stage of the game.
Do you feel that if, because with all of the human race, certainly the herd mentality is extremely strong, the desire to fit into the herd or the structure.
That's correct.
So if the critical mass was reached within the military, where those who are not yet willing to stand up, if we reached a point where enough percentage did stand up, would not a much larger percentage then follow?
I believe so, because once the group stood up, they would become the leaders, and the others would begin to wonder about their own belief systems. And once you begin to wonder about your own, then you're willing to listen to both sides of the story. And once you've listened to both sides of the story, let me tell you, it isn't hard to pick the side that you need to be on, which is exactly where I am right now.
Some time ago, Obama asked about 109 high-level generals and admirals because they would not do the inhuman and inappropriate, murderous things that he was asking them to do as part of his, you should excuse the expression, foreign policy. And one after another, they said no, they said no, they said no. Before that, there were, if I'm not mistaken, 4 high-ranking generals who were suddenly retired because they would not drop a nuclear bomb on Iran. They simply said no. So there are people in the military with honor and with dignity and with decency who are willing to stand for their principles and to die for their principles if necessary.
But they need to be awakened, and that's the trouble right now. So many of them are still asleep, just like I was before I woke up.
Well, I've heard at several presentations I've done, I've had people from the audience approach me after the Q&A, after the question and answer, veterans from Iraq, from Afghanistan, that said their whole group was aware of the climate engineering issue, was following to the best of their ability the data posted on geoengineeringwatch.org and perhaps other sites, and that the knowledge of this issue was circulating widely within their ranks. And that's certainly extremely encouraging to me. And I've been into the recruiting offices for the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and very, very respectful, courteous young men and women there who were really interested in what I had to say. And you know, I introduced this carefully that there's been a lot of bad advice from some in the scientific community that's been given to the U.S. military, and that, you know, we know there's certainly many honorable men and women in the military. We're simply trying to make them aware of these programs, and they were very receptive. So I can only hope the undercurrent of awareness is much larger than we already know. And there was a statement made by this particular insider during this conversation that I had with him and one he'd had with this congressional rep, where he indicated that the data that we were putting out about climate engineering was probably causing some heartburn with some in the Pentagon. So I hope that's the case. I hope that there's some there that are scratching their heads now and wondering, are we doing the right thing? And I hope and pray that they investigate.
They need to wake up, but the first time that you begin to question is the time when you can wake up. That is the beginning of the wake-up call. Believe me.
That's encouraging.
What is happening among the pilots?
Yes.
What do you know about what's happening among the pilots who are the most immediate front-line wake-up required people on the planet?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, I spoke to a KC-135 pilot face-to-face, and he, I believe, sincerely did not know what he was involved with, or potentially involved with, I should say, because I certainly, at that point, we could not know if he was a part of these programs or not. But I do know this. The last information I got about him from a mutual friend was that he went back and asked questions, and he was now medicated off flight duty and behind a desk. So perhaps that's what happens if you ask questions in these programs, and that's that sort of control that's being exercised. We all saw what happened to Pat Tillman, and he certainly would have made a lot of waves had he been able to live through the experience. So again, these vets I talked to from Iraq and Afghanistan were quite aware, quite awake, quite concerned, and I can only hope that their numbers are growing. I believe they
are. Iraq and Afghanistan and our other expanding and perpetual war zones, also being chemtrailed, or is it only reserved for the peaceful citizens of the countries of the world that we're not bombing at the moment?
There is nowhere to escape the fallout that we know of. Again, the best example that we have of that, regardless of whether people see this in their airspace or not, is irrelevant because of the drift. So when we have a study from 2010, 1,000 whales from the most remote places on the planet, and their tissues were tested for inorganics, and the report stated, and I'm quoting exactly, that they had jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in their tissues. So there's nowhere to escape from this, and I've looked for aerial imagery from every place in the globe that we can find it from, and there is no place exempt that we can see. Now, there is a couple examples of countries that seemed to be pushing back against these programs. One was Ireland for a short time. Ireland was the first one to be financially collapsed. Another was Mexico. We know people in Mexico who indicated the government was definitely pushing back hard against these programs over Mexico, and immediately there was a cessation in the spring, according to the data we have, and then the swine flu issue occurred in Mexico. Immediately after that incident, spraying resumed. So was that a shot across their bow? We can speculate. We don't know, but there was a cessation and then a resumption of the spraying that correlated exactly with that event. So anybody who tries to push back or wants us out of their airspace seems to be thrown under the bus.
What about West Africa? What about the Ebola countries? What do we know about the chemtrailing going on there?
Certainly, we've seen a history of it there going back many decades. In fact, it appears to be one of the methods by which the U.S. was able to put boots in the ground in so many countries. The countries were simply brought to their knees with climate engineering. The water was shut off, exactly as they're doing to California now. They can shut the water off. This is a very, very straightforward function of climate engineering. When you aerosolize a storm track, too many condensation nuclei, water tends to migrate somewhere else. And they can actually blow apart very extensive storm systems. In fact, hurricanes, let's look at the hurricane season in the Atlantic. It's basically non-existent since 2006, when even the Discovery Channel admitted briefly on the record the U.S. had reinvigorated its hurricane suppression program. We have not had a major landfall since, not one. Hurricane Sandy was not a major hurricane. So we see that they have that much power over huge storms to break them apart or steer them away from anywhere they don't want them to hit. Or in the case of Sandy, steer them exactly where they want them to hit. Was that also a shot across somebody's bow? Were there politicians on the East Coast that were maybe starting to show resistance to climate engineering? And was Hurricane Sandy a demonstration of their power? Hurricane Sandy made a 90-degree westerly turn, unprecedented westerly turn that somehow they knew was going to happen 7 days ahead of time. Meteorologically, this is absolutely absurd. Absurd that they could have known this. So they do have that much power. And again, back to Africa, this has been going on that long and appears to be, again, one of the tools by which the U.S. has brought countries to their knees, forced them to accept U.S. occupation in one form or another. And this is just business as usual.
So the 3,000 American soldiers going into West Africa are there for a number of reasons, I suppose.
I feel that's exactly true. And if you look at some of the statements from people in those regions, they are perplexed that the quote-unquote aid being sent is military aid. Let's look at Cyclone Haiyan that cut a swath through the Philippines, that intensified radically at the last moment before landfall. Now, that was an incredibly anomalous intensification, up to 195 mile-per-hour sustained winds. Cut a giant swath through the Philippines. The U.S. sent in, quote, military aid, and now they're building bases there. On the flip side, we just saw a hurricane 2 months ago heading straight for the Hawaiian Islands. That was extremely anomalously blown to bits right before it made landfall. There was, meteorologically speaking, nothing that could have caused this in any natural sense. So they have the power to make or break these storms. They're using that power. And again, all the while causing so much damage to the planetary system that now you have these feedback loops triggered. Again, I want people to keep the methane issue in mind, because The methane spewing into the atmosphere right now is cataclysmic. In fact, you have the frontline Arctic scientists saying, as of about 4 weeks ago, and finally we're getting some truth from academia that have downplayed things so far. The frontline Arctic scientists are saying this: on the current course, without a change of direction, without something mitigating this methane release, which geoengineering has helped to trigger, that we are looking at a scenario with no life on Earth by 2040. That's not very long. So this is coming from the frontline Arctic scientists. So this is how cataclysmic climate engineering is. And it's not the only cause of these mechanisms at all. I'm not saying that we have 100 million tons of CO2 entering the atmosphere a day. That's a problem. But we have the Earth unable to respond to this because climate engineering, again, thwarting the hydrological cycle, causing the boreal forest to burn to the ground, forest that would have normally be being uptaken a lot of these this carbon sequestration, which they would normally do. They become carbon sources instead of carbon sinks. The planet basically from top to bottom can't respond to the damage being done because it's in a geoengineering straitjacket.
Now, I could understand if people are flooding the planet with radiation and with toxic chemicals and destroying the food system, and they think that they're going to go deep under the ground and live for several hundred years while the planet restores itself, or while they restore the planet underground. I could understand that. But this is so cataclysmic that even the deep underground military and other bases will not protect these people. What do you believe they're thinking, the elites, the ones who think that they're in charge and would, of course, be the most valuable people to preserve? What's going on in their brains? Dane, do you have any idea?
I believe that those at the true inner circle, which can only be considered psychopathic, and again, I want to state this, I've said it before, but it's important to remember that common thread with various forms of psychopathic behavior, and that is a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. This is straight out of the psychoanalysis manual. So if you consider that, even with that in mind, I believe the power structure is realizing that they have, in fact, the ship on which they also depend. So when they go into the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, and they are stocking them up. In fact, 3 years ago, we contacted Mountain House Foods, who went off retail for a while because they were stocking up the U.S. military, stocking up these bunkers. We're looking at equilibrium periods at best based on past paleo events like the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, methane mass expulsion, methane mass extinction 55 million years ago. The equilibrium period then, and this event that we're undergoing now looks much more severe, the equilibrium period was 10 to 20 million years. You can't stay in a bunker that long. And again, if we stay on the track we're on right now, we are heading toward Venus syndrome. We are on that track right now. There's enough methane in the Laptev Sea in the Arctic, mathematically, to cause a Permian-style mass extinction 100 times over. There's enough to turn this planet into Venus if it all escapes. There's also mantle methane. There's methane hydrate on the seafloor, and there's mantle methane as well. Both are releasing. The last research vessels from the Arctic saw plumes of methane a kilometer wide, and they're seeing thousands of these plumes. We're seeing noctilucent clouds, very southern latitudes, which is methane saturating the atmosphere. And we believe right now Project Lucy and Project Alamo are in full deployment, and that is to use the ionosphere heaters like HARP, of which there are several dozen ground-based facilities, and we have the sea-based facilities as well. They are trying to, what amounts to microwaving the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in a very desperate and destructive attempt to degrade the methane, to break it down with unknown consequences. So the layers of insanity simply just keep growing. They go from one bad decision to another, and now the stakes are total.
If anything ever required the ordinary citizen to say, no, I will not fuel the plane. No, I will not fly the plane. No, I will not fill out the paperwork. No, I will not pay the taxes. No, I will not participate in my little corner of this vast system. If ever that was required, that time is now. And that is what works.
Indeed. Dane, yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Bert. I'm sorry.
You have to come over closer. General Bert's a little bit further away from the microphone than he needs to be. Come on over.
What I said was that you can't, when you're doing that and trying to wake people up, you cannot get one or two people at a time. Again, I go back to the principle of war en masse. You need thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people all saying the same thing. Don't you dare do that. You have screwed this up. Now fix it.
But social movements of this sort typically start spontaneously, simultaneously in many places, and then because the zeitgeist is right, because the psychological timing is right, because the issue is ripe, then suddenly you have the people, if you will, surging to the barricades. But it always starts with one here and one there and one another place.
And right now we need a bunch of people who are listening, waking up, and then willing, this is a very important piece of this, then willing to stand up, and do something to correct what's going on. And that is the difficult part, to get the mass standing up, all yelling at the same time, don't you dare do this.
And that was why it was so exciting when 15 different people who don't know each other all sent me your latest video, Dane, in which you make the point. Well, first of all, the maps in that video are quite staggering. There's no way around the reality that you're pointing to when you show those maps. But you also make the point that it is a bad career move for people who are meteorologists, for example, to say what's really going on and to point to the chemtrail clouds. And it is a bad career move for pilots. It is a bad career move. But the question is, what career for parents? What career is your career? Is your career a careening catastrophe into methane death? Or is your career saving life, yours and that of the planet?
Exactly. Dane, you've talked about this looming catastrophe. If the governments of the world had not been running these black ops, would that catastrophe be happening anyway because of human activity? Or are we seeing a catastrophe that is solely the result of government behavior?
The situation is far more complex than one factor, and this is the case with climate engineering. A lot of people, even the anti-climate engineering community, want to put climate engineering in this box or that box. It's a very complex scenario, and there are many agendas being carried out. If we turn the clock back to the late 40s, what we saw is this. The planet, in the initial stages of climate engineering, the input produced a far greater output, in that very low-scale climate engineering caused planetary cooling. And we saw the trajectory that was going up linearly drop, starting from the late 40s all the way to 1970. If you guys may remember that in the early 70s, there was some talk of the planet cooling. In fact, maybe another ice age was coming. The climate science community could not figure out why the planet had cooled somewhat for the last 20 years. But then the negative feedback mechanisms kicked in. The planet began to warm again quite rapidly, because these cooling effects are temporary. As they do damage, the effects are lost, and then many various aspects begin to manifest the warming again. So had this never happened, we can't know exactly the outcome that we would have had, but we can say this for certain. Had they never climate engineered, as the planet began to warm as it was heading into the 40s, the hydrological cycle goes into high gear. That's how the planet cools itself. The laws of physics again state 7% more moisture is carried in the atmosphere for every degree of warming. So the rain would have picked up everywhere around the globe. The rain is more acidic because there's more carbon in the atmosphere. That's a stimulant of the boreal forest. So the boreal forest the northern latitude forests, which are the second greatest source of oxygen on the planet, by the way, next to plankton, they begin to thrive. They begin to grow. They begin to uptake carbon. And now we have quite the opposite effect. Now, because of toxic rain, because of a shredded ozone layer, because of protracted drought caused for either strategic reasons, population manipulation reasons, we have forests that are not able to feed on carbon. In fact, the conditions are so intense that the stomata, the respiratory ports on foliage like forests, are closing. So the trees not only are dying of drought, they're starving to death because they cannot feed, they cannot uptake carbon. So the cycle just starts to go in a completely negative direction. And again, we will now never know how much better off we would have been had they never started these programs. But I believe based on all available data, we can say this for certain. We would have been exponentially better off. And we have comparable events to this. 5.2 million years ago, the Pliocene epoch, the carbon counts were 25% higher than they are today. And we had a thriving western U.S. We had thriving boreal forests. The paleo data makes that clear. We had sea levels that were 100 feet higher. So that's clearly a problem for modern civilization. But I would ask this: would we be better off with a planet that's alive with higher sea levels, or a planet that's dead? Which is clear.
Let me think. You have children, and I've asked you this before. You look at your children, and what do you see?
For me, I see in my own face despair at these beautiful creatures that are children, to which we owe our lives. All of us owe our lives. And I am extremely perplexed at how so many people can ignore that responsibility. And I'll give a glaring example of this. I spoke to one of the top management at Jeppesen, which is a subsidiary of Boeing. Jeppesen does all the flight coordination around the globe. Certainly they are involved with climate engineering, and I know this person has children. Now, I spoke on peripheral issues for about 15 minutes to get the conversation going, and I asked him, the moment I mentioned geoengineering, he turned his back, and that was perplexing to me, certainly. I don't understand that type of thing. I don't understand how people can look their children in the eyes, Rima. I don't understand it, all with this sort of program.
I can give you a little bit of an answer. And that little bit of an answer, this is part of the answer to this question, Dane, is fluoride. Fluoride is appreciated by many of us as a neurotoxin and an endocrine toxin, but it is not appreciated for its profound emotional toxicity. Fluoride makes people so apathetic that they are separated from their innate humanity. Fluoride calcifies the pineal gland, which many people believe acts as the, if you will, the receiver for connection to the wider universe, and therefore the moral compass. And if you take away the moral compass, if you take away the ability to be outraged, if you take away the ability to make feelingful decisions like, no, I won't sacrifice my children's lives for my immediate ease and convenience. If you take that away, then you get what you're describing. And fluoride is a profoundly dehumanizing tool.
And we know now the synergistic toxicity with fluoride and aluminum, synergistic toxicity with aluminum and we have those combinations. So when you add that on top of human nature, which frankly has always left a lot to be desired. I'm a student of Stoic philosophy. It's 2,000-year-old chronology of the behavior of the human race, and very, very similar parallels. And when you add what you just outlined on top of that, it's a very, very unfortunate mix indeed. And we are facing the ramifications of that. Then we add the normalcy bias, sort of truth. I mean, all the way around, it's led us to a very dark place. But the seeds we're planting right now, with people even who don't want to hear it, will have no choice but to sprout soon, because our reality is changing by the day. And I believe the power structure right now is desperately trying to hide the gravity and severity of what we face till the last possible moment. And I would argue the more seeds we can plant as that moment begins to unfold, and I think it's already beginning, people will have no choice but to wake up, like it or not. And at that point, if they have enough data to go on and they understand how we got to this dark place, perhaps we can yet change the flavor of what we have.
I agree completely, but let me ask you one very concrete question. Why California? Why desiccate California?
And the factors that I would say are absolutely a part of this equation. One, California is a climate sacrifice zone. I don't know if you guys have seen or followed that El Nino has tried to form twice this year. The Kelvin wave for El Nino, which is the wave of rising warm water, was the greatest ever recorded in the spring. They immediately, when that data was released, the high pressure was locked in over California, and they do have the means to put this high pressure in place. Absolutely, positively. The science is clear for that. And we saw that the long-term forecasts were immediately changed as soon as this Kelvin wave was really announced. That high pressure over California changes the trade winds. It pushes them the opposite direction, and that pushes that heat back toward the Western Pacific. Why are they trying to do that? Because if El Nino fully formed, so much water vapor would go into the atmosphere, so much temperature would be released from the ocean that it would push 2014 into absolute record territory for temperatures. So we saw that happen again in the spring. As that Kelvin wave was suppressed, much to the surprise of the meteorological community, another one began to form. And immediately the long-term forecast again changed for California the next day. And the high pressure was locked in. The Kelvin wave is being pushed back again right now. It looks like it may still form to some degree. Second issue, when we see bad news from the Arctic, immediately the long-term forecast over California changes. So this conveyor that they're building, high pressure over California, spins clockwise. That's like a picture of the pulley, like on a with a belt going around it. They push the jet stream into Alaska, cool it, push it back down in the eastern U.S., cool the eastern U.S., which confuses the population, and then they pick up moisture from the Gulf Coast and pump it into the Arctic, where they're ice nucleating it to try to keep some of that Arctic ice there. So there's a very complex scenario with various aspects of climate feedback loop that California appears to be an unfortunate consequence of what they're trying to do. Next, they also appear to be making California a target because there are weather systems that have approached from the east, monsoonal in nature, that they have completely blown apart and not allowed that rain to fall. Now we have, as of a week ago, Governor Jerry Brown signing what is brand new in California, a basic takeover legislation for water rights and groundwater pumping. This
is the Agenda 21.
Right, and necessary if you're going to really create depopulation on a high level. But, Dane, it's not just one agency doing this and not just one government. When you described what was happening with the El Nino trying to form and reform, it sounds to me almost as though there are at least two actors, one wanting it to go one way and the other wanting it to go the other way. Is the United States Black Ops, are they the only actors, or are there other forces that are countervailing? Is there a weather war going on?
Yes. No question that there are opposing strategic forces here. In regard to the Kelvin wave and the formation of El Nino, I believe...
And there we go, the end of the program. I believe so.
Thank you so much, Dane.
Thank you, Dane. Wow, we have to have you back soon to continue this discussion. Wow.